Yeah, so in New Zealand we've got 63 animal welfare inspectors and NATE officers, and we're located in locations from Whangarei to Invercargill, and we work alongside the SPCA. So SPCA have exactly the same powers that we do. They stick more to companion animals, your dogs and cats. We stick more to the production side of farming, dairy, sheep, pigs, chickens, that sort of thing. And lifestyle blocks are somewhere down the middle. Okay, so small lifestyle blocks, you know, less than 20 animals, the SPCA will do. Slightly larger lifestyle blocks we'll look after. SPCA are partly funded by the taxpayer, and about half of what they need, and then the other half is by fundraising and public donations. Right, so how do we get our animal welfare compliance work? Largely through people phoning us up via our 0800 number or filling out an internet form. And there's sort of two types of person that makes an animal welfare complaint: those that know what they're talking about and those that don't. And now you've got this sort of rural-urban divide, and often urban people honestly don't really understand what goes on a commercial farm. So yes, we will get complaints from people in the rural sector, often neighbours, might be tanker drivers, it could be private veterinarians. They will inform us of an issue, okay? But a lot of them aren't that serious. It's just part of everyday farming, the complaints we receive. But sometimes we'll still follow it up just in case. So we get about just under 3,000 complaints per year. MPI also has 200 veterinarians employed at export meat plants. Okay, those veterinarians are also animal welfare warranted and will gather evidence of animal welfare issues that they detect at the meat company. Okay, so they refer about 1,200 cases a year to us from what they're picking up at the meat company. Okay, so in your sector, sheep, you're talking ingrown horns, you're talking lambs getting born at the works, bad lameness, a lot of bobby calf issues. So that gets reported to us, sometimes very light animals, so the vet will report that to MPI. Okay, the vets are there because of EU requirements. Okay, you won't get to meat into Europe unless you have a veterinarian at your export meat plant. Okay, we also do some targeted inspection work, so we turn up at all rodeos, no matter what. Every rodeo has an animal welfare inspector present. We turn up at sale yards quite frequently. We do zoos, and we target what we call recidivists. So people, and you probably know what I'm talking about, they just can't get it right year after year, so we will sit on them and target them for inspections.
Is that sort of like poor farm management, stuff like that?
Poor farm management, stuff like that. We haven't targeted your sector. We had a wee dabble in January, February. We started to send some animal welfare inspectors out to wool sheds. We haven't decided if we'll make that a program of work in the future. Let's face it, there's 64 of us, and there's a hell of a lot of wool sheds and a lot of shearing going on at any point in time.
Cool. So the principal piece of legislation that our animal welfare inspectors are enforcing is the Animal Welfare Act. And this is both for MPI inspectors and the SPCA. So it's a really complex and comprehensive piece of legislation. But basically, in a nutshell, it focuses on the prevention of ill treatment and inadequate care of animals. It has specific provisions for animals in research, testing and teaching, safari parks, animals in a wild state, for traps, and it specifies that owners and persons in charge of animals must meet the physical health and behavioural needs of those animals, but also that those needs are met in accordance with good practice and scientific knowledge. So the penalties for that act, for breaches of the Act, is quite hefty in some of the more severe cases, and that is several thousands of dollars and terms of imprisonment. So what sits underneath the Animal Welfare Act is what we've got. What here is the secondary legislation, which is our regulations. So these are tools that can address lower level offending that we see. They're a bit more specific than the Act, and they usually target a specific point in time or a procedure. They are directly enforceable largely by infringement. They have appropriate penalties for low to medium offending, And we use these to promote behaviour change. And that would be largely when we issue an infringement, think something probably similar to a parking or a speeding fine. We use these when the level of offending that we see is disproportionate to a criminal conviction at that time. And the other tool in the toolbox that we do use is our codes of welfare. You may have seen that we've got some copies over on the tables at the side there. It is available online. They are written for the layperson. So codes of welfare are species specific, and they have specific standards for that species at specific points in that time. So we've got on the screen here probably the two most relevant ones for your industry. We've got minimum standard 2, which is animal handling, and it specifies that sheep and beef cattle must be handled at all times in such a way to minimize the risk of pain, injury, or distress. And if we go down to minimum standard 14, which is specific to shearing, dagging, and crutching, it specifies that sheep must have access to food and water as soon as possible after shearing, and that all severe cuts or injuries are treated immediately. Cool. So what's quite unique about the codes of welfare is they are not directly enforceable. However, when we are looking at a potential prosecution or a conviction, we do take these minimum standards into account. So if we believe that that minimum standard has been breached, then we will use that as supporting evidence in a prosecution file. But if a defendant can prove that the minimum standard has been exceeded, it can be used as a defence.
Just sort of make the point too that often our world is down near the bottom. Okay, we deal in minimum standards, and I know NZ Merino, you're aiming for way above the minimum. It's not like, okay, let's see if we can achieve the minimum. So your industry is aiming to achieve much, much higher than the minimum. So we just sort of make that point as well. Okay, sheep complaints, what are we seeing? So of all the animal groups we deal with, sheep's number one. It used to be actually dairy. Dairy used to be the most complaints, but actually sheep's taken over. Sheep's number one. It's about 30% of all the animal complaints we receive. Things like light sheep, fly strike sheep, injuries, gross, real bad mastitis, we'll see, ingrown horns, foot rot, and increasingly lambs not getting shelter. That's going to be a tricky one, that one. But we're starting to get more people just not accepting our death rate of lambs over winter. So we're increasingly getting complaints about that as well. Okay, so what happens when we find an issue? At the top end, we can prosecute. We do roughly between 25 and 30 prosecutions per year. But you've got to bear in mind, we get 2,500 complaints, so between 25 and 30 prosecutions. That's not a lot, okay? So we don't prosecute hugely, and we usually reserve it for the most serious cases. As Lucy said, at the top end you can go to jail. A Taihape farmer went to jail for 2 years in March for real bad fly strike, plus a lot of dead dying sheep when we turned up. Okay, so he got a 2-year jail sentence. How we deal with a lot of cases now is by infringement notice. That's the instant fine, and so the stuff that gets referred to us by the 200 vets, we issue about just over 600 infringements per year. It's a $500 fine. And it's pretty much instant. We don't do a lot of follow-up on the farmer or anything like that. The farmer, first thing he knows about it is he gets a $500 fine through the mail for an ingrown horn in a sheep, something like that. Okay, next level down is what we call directed compliance. We do a lot of directing farmers to do things. And it's not a nice to do, it's a must do. So for example, we come across a farm and the animals are just too light. Okay. What we'll do is we'll bring in a farm consultant, we'll probably bring in a veterinarian, and we'll sit down, and often the consultant's really good because feeding might not be the answer, destocking might be the answer, but we're not that enough of an expert to make that call. So what will happen is we'll come up with a feed budget, we may take the consultant's advice that destocking is the better option, and then we direct the farmer to do that. And like I said, it's not a nice to do, it's a must do. Okay, that is the way we deal with a lot of stuff like that. Okay, If we go below, you've used the phrase in here, dobbing people in and things like that. Sometimes it's not a matter of, sometimes you're doing the farmer a favour. We get a lot of issues, we get like mental health issues, particularly during something like a drought. So there was a case up the road here, North Canterbury. North Canterbury is really susceptible to droughts if you're not from around here. Another farmer advised us of an issue, real light sheep on a farm. Okay, so we went there, yep, they were light, but not to the extent where we were looking at prosecution or anything like that. Nothing was dropping dead, or nothing nearly that serious. But this guy was really strung out. He had recently leased a farm in North Canterbury. He'd never seen a North Canterbury drought. And he wasn't making himself available of the free veterinary advice that we were providing. He wasn't using the tax subsidies that were out there. He wasn't, Rural Support Trust were organising social events. He wasn't aware of that. So we brought some other people along from MPI who aren't enforcement type officers, and they hooked him into all these support services that were available. Okay, it might have saved his life. I mean, I'm not being over dramatic. He was really strung out. Okay, so you're not necessarily dobbing somebody in. You're sort of helping them as well. Because remember, like I said, we only prosecute a very small number of people. There's lots of options we can choose other than prosecution. Elderly farmers are another problem area. Poor succession planning, you probably have dealt with them. Couples in their 80s trying to run the farm, son's keen as hell to take over. Sometimes it's a matter of sitting around the kitchen table and say, you need to come up with a succession plan. Okay, you're not coping, and we do a bit of that work as well. Okay, PETA allegations. Yep, so we can add some detail around this. It was just before Christmas, a bit over a week before Christmas. PETA made contact with us. They supplied us with a huge amount of video. We couldn't even download it properly. There was so much of it. A couple of very big, long reports. The allegations went back to 2023 and then right through 2024. Allegations about the shearers, and you would have seen the video. There was some allegations about truck drivers, people handling sheep. There was some allegations about things going on farm, tailing, cutting throat. So they didn't wait around for us to investigate it. Pretty much they went straight out to the media after they gave us. So 30 December, as you heard, they went out to the media, went out to the New York Post, went out to the mainstream media in New Zealand, and it's everywhere. And as Dave said, it sort of snowballed from there. We came back on the 6th after people had a break for Christmas and got into it. We put about 13 people on it. It took us about 530 hours of reviewing all the video and going through the reports. We sort of isolated it down to about 366 individual allegations against 49 persons of interest. Okay. Now, I can't tell you where we're at in our investigation at the moment because you would have seen the video. That's the upper end of it. That's the more serious stuff, is the stuff that's been on the news or you can see on the PETA website. Other stuff is way less minor. There's some of those 49 people we've already written off, or we've seen them and said, you're part of the PETA allegations, but we're not taking it any further. Don't kick a sheep up the arse. It's not, no pain and distress there, bad look, we're not taking any sort of enforcement action against that. The stuff with the tailing, using a hot iron, that's the way we do it in New Zealand. There's nothing to see with the tailing. Okay, but there is some stuff to see, and you will agree that that stuff in the video footage isn't acceptable, and that is still being worked on as an investigation at the moment.
What about the shearer who chucked the sheep at the wall?
Like I said, can't go into the detail. It's still an ongoing investigation.
So is this me? Are you?
Yeah, flipped it on.
Oh, no. No, we'll skip one.
What's that one? Oh, that one. Oh,
So just to elaborate probably a little bit more on what Dave touched on before, PETA isn't going to go away anytime soon. Its campaign is not isolated to New Zealand, and we have strong information to suggest that this won't be a one-off. If we look at other countries that PETA have targeted, if we look at Australia, they've already carried out 7 exposés on the Australian shearing industry. They've been quite successful, and they have resulted in successful prosecutions to the individuals. And the evidence that was obtained to support the expose has been exactly the same as in New Zealand. It's undercover people in shearing sheds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick question, how far along are they in dealing with it, and are you using their experiences to help determine what we might do here in New Zealand?
PETA or...
No.
Oh, the Australians.
Yeah, if it's happened, they've had seven.
Yeah, we do have a relationship with some states in Australia, but no, we know what we're doing. We'll just carry on doing it. What the Australians did is of no concern to me, to be honest. At the end of the day, we'll deal with it how we see fit in New Zealand, really.
And different legislation that we have to work to as well. Yeah. So, PETA isn't the only advocacy group out there, as you probably know. There's hundreds. These are probably the most prolific that we would see within New Zealand, and I'll just touch on a few of them. So on the top left corner, we do have the SPCA. Probably a little bit confusing because they are our co-regulator for the Animal Welfare Act. You know, Pete alluded to that they concentrate more on companion animals. We do production animals. However, they do have specific advocacy viewpoints on certain things. Namely, rodeos and the racing industry are probably two most prominent ones. So as a result, MPI and SPCA, we do have a really robust MOU, and anything to do with rodeos and racing industry, we would take more of a leading role, especially with enforcement, just to mitigate that conflict of interest factor. If you go across, you'll see the SAFE emblem, so that's saving animals from exploitation. I think it's fair to say they're probably, within New Zealand specifically, our most active and resourceful group. So they have several campaigns that are targeting New Zealand at the moment, anything from aquaculture to poultry to winter grazing. They write to us via the Official Information Act pretty much every week, wanting to know what MPI are doing about these topics that they're campaigning against. They have regular meetings with our director, and they're really holding us to account, especially on some specific topics that they're campaigning against at the moment.
What's that?
I would just want to there right now.
So if we go underneath the SPCA logo there, we've got the New Zealand Animal Law Association, and they are unique again. So they actually took MPI to court over a discrepancy in the review of the Rodeo Code of Welfare. It was more of an administrative discrepancy. However, they did win. They won against MPI, and as a result, the current Rodeo Code of Welfare was revoked, and it's now completely under review. So they did promote some quite drastic reaction as a result of that. The rest of them, probably a little bit less, I guess, active. However, I think it's just really important to note that none of these organisations operate in isolation. They share each other's campaigns, they attend in person to each other's campaigns. They've all got kind of the same messages, and they've all got the same kind of end goals. And largely that is an independent commissioner for animal welfare within New Zealand, to ban production animal farming, and just to promote veganism. Really? So just some more specific examples of what we see. Again, this is a safe one. This is ongoing for their intensive winter grazing campaign, which they have named mud farming. It's not a term that we like. However, that's what's kind of it's being more commonly known as through the language that these advocacy groups are using. Here, they're actually targeting the consumer. They're outside McDonald's, and they're basically alleging that McDonald's are sourcing beef from areas that are subject to intensive winter grazing, basically, and adverse welfare outcomes because of that. Another safe one, you may have seen this one. This is quite unique, really. So SAFE actually targeted supermarkets with this one. So back in 2022, you may be aware that battery cages within the poultry industry were phased out to replace what we call colony cages. They provide the hens with a little bit more space, some behavioural enrichment, so a bit more welfare friendly. Perfectly legal in New Zealand. Due to, I guess, the traction of the campaign for to become cage-free from the public, New Zealand supermarkets, actually 2 of them, basically said that by 2027, they're not even going to entertain colony cages. They will just go cage-free. They will only get their eggs from cage-free suppliers. So you can see how that would have influenced the egg industry. So a lot of the suppliers went, well, what's the point in us going to colony cages? We may as well phase out completely, just so that we can secure our supply to those supermarkets. Cool. And another one, I guess, another billboard. Aside from what Dave showed earlier, this one's in Wellington, and just a digital billboard which is highlighting the New Zealand shearing allegations. And the one on the right is the mud farming or intensive winter grazing campaign that SAFE are running at the moment. That's an online petition and it's got several thousand signatures so far. So I think it's really important just to remember that this isn't going away. These groups do not, they're not working in isolation. They're using a lot of different channels, from billboards to social media, to radio, to television, to Parliament. Any kind of channel that they can use, they will use. And I guess, you know, they're not operating in isolation. So, cool. You want to do this one? Okay.
Yeah, we can do that one or the next one. Oh.
You do that one?
Yeah, so we're coming near the end of it. You know, what can you do to help protect your industry? You know, promote good animal welfare through training, culture, and addressing poor behaviour within your teams. Look, I'm probably not telling you anything. You'll go into a shearing shed and work alongside a gang. Some are better than others. Some will have a real good culture and some will have a bad culture, okay? And the ones that have a bad culture, it's probably not just animal welfare. It's probably a hell of a lot of swearing going along, some inappropriate behaviour, some inappropriate comments, bit of drug use, shit culture within a particular gang. Other gangs will have a much different culture, okay? So, look, you're not, again, I said, you're not dobbing them in, but there's no legal obligation for you to tell MPI if something animal welfare is going on, okay? We think you've got a moral obligation and we like to hear it, and I've told you we don't prosecute anybody by a country mile, but I think you should let the shearing contractor know. If there's some pretty poor animal welfare going on, let the shearing contract boss know what's going on, and consider reporting it to us. Just last slide. I spoke to the Contractors Association last week, and so I told them, I mean, it's quite obvious. I mean, shearer's shearing a sheep, and if he takes to it with the shearing piece, well, he's committed an offence. But actually, his boss may have committed an offence as well. Okay, depends what sort of training he gave him, but depends what supervision's going on, and the animal owner is also responsible. Okay, so a lot of animal owners don't realise that. They can't be totally ignorant of what's going on in the shearing shed. They need to be taking an interest of what's going on in the shearing shed because they are also liable for animal welfare. You're not, okay? You're that far removed that you're not responsible for animal welfare. But we're saying is talk up, let the shearing contractor know what's going on and consider letting us know what's going on as well. All right, animal welfare matters. Look, you might not be taking the vegan option for lunch today. You may disagree with their principles, but it makes economic sense as well, high standards of animal welfare. Okay, we have a free trade agreement with the UK. There's a whole chapter on high standards of animal welfare and improving standards of animal welfare in that free trade agreement with the UK. It's making good economic sense, high standards of animal welfare. Those advocacy groups are not going away. They're growing. They're quite buoyed up by recent success. Greyhounds going, okay, next year, no more greyhounds. All cages gone, pretty much. They're pretty buoyed up and they're having a real crack now over rodeos. They're going to have a crack over mud and they'll be the next issues that they'll be having a go at. Petters will continue in New Zealand. If the Australia examples anything to go by, they'll just continue in their work in New Zealand. And that's basically it. And that's just the message we want to push. Compliance isn't my problem alone, okay? We can only achieve really good standards of animal welfare in New Zealand if the industry takes an active part. We were talking about museling before, okay? We passed a law about museling, but actually it was under control well and truly when we passed a law on it. So there's a lot your industry can do, and the meat industry, to get things under control, and then you don't even need to put regulations in place if you get some of the stuff under control. So that's it, thank you.